There is growing scrutiny on food labels.
The natural label is so incredibly misleading.
Class action lawsuits against food and beverage companies, they are hitting record highs.
Cheerios protein actually contains only a smidgen more protein and 17 times as much sugar.
Many Americans look for the word natural, thinking that that automatically means it provides nutritional benefits.
The grocery store aisles are a battlefield of nutrition claims, where words like natural, organic, and whole grain compete for your attention and trust. But beneath these enticing labels lies a complex world of marketing strategies that often blur the line between truth and manipulation. Consider the natural label, a term once so widely misused that it has lost much of its credibility.
The natural claim is one of the most vague and misleading green claims that we see out on the marketplace.
After years of bad press and consumer backlash, many companies have scaled back its use. Yet, the legacy of this deceptive marketing tactic persists, often lulling consumers into a false sense of health and purity. Take, for example, a package of shredded cheese marketed as natural. A quick glance at the label might reveal more than just milk, enzymes, and salt. It could include anti-caking agents, preservatives like natamycin, and other processed additives. The word natural conjures images of simplicity, but it often masks the reality of a product loaded with industrially refined components. This isn't just a minor inconvenience. It's a deliberate deception that directly impacts consumer health choices. By creating a false sense of nutritional value, these misleading labels undermine well-intentioned efforts to eat healthier. Consumers who think they're making informed decisions often end up consuming products that are far from the wholesome image those labels project. But why do companies get away with this? When did it all start? And how did we end up in a world where food labels tell only half the truth? To understand why food labels lie to us today, we have to go back to a time when labels didn't even exist. Imagine living in the 1800s. Grocery stores weren't a thing yet. People got their food from local farms, markets, or neighbors. You knew exactly where your milk, meat, and bread came from. No one needed a label to tell them what was inside because you could see it with your own eyes, or trust the person who made it. Bakers, butchers, and farmers were often people you knew personally. If you wanted milk, you might even know the cow's name. Back then, there was no need to question what was in your food. Transparency was built into the system. Labels weren't necessary because the connection between food and its source was immediate and clear. But everything changed during the Industrial Revolution in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Factories began mass-producing food to make it cheaper and last longer. Things like canned goods, boxed crackers, and processed meats started showing up in shops. Suddenly, food didn't come from your local farmer anymore. It came from big companies shipping products from hundreds or even thousands of miles away. Here's where things got tricky. With food coming from factories, you couldn't see how it was made. What ingredients were used? Was it fresh? Was it even safe to eat? Companies realized they needed a way to convince people their products were good. That's when labels started showing up. But instead of being honest, companies used labels to sell an image. They printed words like pure, fresh, and homemade on their products to make them seem trustworthy. The truth? Many of these foods were heavily processed or even harmful. For example, some companies added dangerous chemicals like formaldehyde to preserve meat or chalk powder to make milk look whiter. At this time, there were no laws to stop them. Companies could write whatever they wanted on their labels, and no one was checking if it was true. It was all about making money, not keeping people safe. By the early 1900s, people began to notice something was wrong. Food didn't taste like it used to, and illnesses linked to bad food were becoming common. In 1906, a famous book called The Jungle by Upton Sinclair exposed how gross and unsafe the food industry had become, especially in meatpacking factories. The public was horrified. This led to the creation of the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906, one of the first laws in the U.S. aimed at regulating food labels. It required companies to at least list their ingredients and stop them from using blatantly false claims, like calling rotten meat fresh. It was a good start, but it wasn't enough. The food industry found loopholes to keep stretching the truth. Even with new laws, companies found ways to make their labels sound better than the food inside. Words like natural and healthy became marketing gold. They didn't have strict definitions, so companies could use them freely. For example, a product could be called natural as long as it didn't contain certain artificial additives, even if it was full of processed ingredients. This practice has only grown worse over time. Why? Because it works. Studies show that people are more likely to buy products with words like organic, whole grain, or low fat on the label, even if they don't fully understand what those terms mean.
That word pulls you in and it makes you feel like, for some reason, it's a better food.
Companies know this and use it to their advantage. You might be wondering, isn't anyone making sure these labels are honest? Agencies like the Food and Drug Administration and the U.S. Department of Agriculture do oversee food labeling, but their rules are often vague. The FDA has no strict definition of the word natural, which leaves it open to interpretation. And when rules are unclear, companies take advantage of the gray areas. But it's not just about unclear rules. It's also about money. The food industry is incredibly powerful and spends millions lobbying to keep regulations loose. After all, stricter rules would mean they can't use the tricks that sell their products. So why do these tricks work so well? It all comes down to psychology. Companies know that most people don't have the time or the energy to analyze every label in the grocery store. When we see words like natural, organic, or low fat, our brains automatically associate them with health, quality, and safety. It's called the halo effect. And it's not just the words. Companies also use colors and designs to influence us. Ever notice how healthy products often have green packaging or images of farms and nature? That's no accident. Green is a color we associate with health and the environment, so it makes us feel good about buying those products, even if they're far from healthy. Companies also use buzzwords to make their products sound more appealing. Words like superfood, antioxidants, and gluten-free catch our attention, even if we don't fully understand what they mean or if they're even relevant to us. Unlike natural, the term organic does have some regulations. In the US, the USDA has specific rules for what can be labeled organic. Organic produce must be grown without synthetic pesticides or fertilizers, and organic meat must come from animals raised without antibiotics or growth hormones. Sounds good, right? But even organic isn't always what it seems. For one, organic doesn't mean pesticide-free. Organic farmers can still use natural pesticides, some of which can be just as harmful as synthetic ones. Then there's the issue of processed organic foods. Just because a cookie is organic doesn't mean it's healthy. It could still be loaded with sugar and unhealthy fats. The label organic only tells you how the ingredients were grown or raised. It says nothing about whether the food is nutritious. Another common label trick is whole grain. You've probably seen it on tortillas, bread, and crackers. Whole grains are healthier than refined grains because they contain more fiber, vitamins, and minerals. But here's the catch. Just because a product says made with whole grains doesn't mean it's entirely made of them. In fact, many products labeled as whole grain have more refined flour than actual whole grains. Companies are only required to include a small amount of whole grains to use the label. So that whole grain bread you're buying might not be much better than white bread. Labels like low-fat and sugar-free are designed to make us feel like we're making healthier choices. But often, these labels come with a trade-off. When companies remove fat from a product, they usually add extra sugar or salt to make up for the lost flavor. The result? A product that's just as unhealthy, or even worse. Sugar-free is another misleading term. Many sugar-free products contain artificial sweeteners, which some studies suggest may have negative effects on health. This might all sound overwhelming, but don't worry. There are ways to fight back. Start by reading the ingredient list on food packages. The shorter the list, the better. Look for real, recognizable ingredients and avoid products with a lot of additives or artificial ingredients. You can also ignore buzzwords on the front of the package. Don't be afraid to do a little research. Learn what different labels actually mean and which ones you can trust. The more informed you are, the harder it will be for companies to trick you.